Today, we're taking on a genuinely fascinating, incredibly complex topic, and we're going to break the whole thing down step by step. We're looking at the Mexican cartels, but we are completely setting aside all those Hollywood dramatizations. Actually, scratch that. We're going even deeper. We're going to reverse engineer how these organizations manage to solve the ultimate global logistics puzzle. And honestly, this matters far beyond just the drug trade because it exposes some fundamental vulnerabilities in global trade security and standard supply chain monitoring. We're going to map this all out by looking strictly at the data. We're talking official government documents, treasury designations, court indictments, and some deeply researched international news reporting. So grab a coffee and let's dive right into this. So the big question we have to ask is, how do you actually build a global synthetic supply chain entirely from scratch? Think about it. When the cartels began pivoting heavily away from plant-based drugs like marijuana and cocaine over to synthetic drugs like fentanyl, they weren't just swapping out their product line. They were suddenly facing this unprecedented international supply chain problem. They had to figure out how to source raw chemical ingredients from literally thousands of miles away, ship them across the ocean, receive them securely, process them, and then distribute them, all while dodging the most sophisticated law enforcement agencies on the planet. This really isn't just a crime story, it's honestly a masterclass in dark logistics. And the escalation of this logistical pivot was just incredibly rapid. Back in April 2019, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime implemented class scheduling for fentanyl and its analogs. This international regulation essentially forced the cartels to adapt their sourcing strategies right then and there. Boom, immediately. By December 2020, things at Mexican entry points had gotten so severe that control of the ports was actually transferred to the Mexican Navy, which is known as SAMAR. Fast forward a bit to June 2023, and you've got the U.S. Department of Justice bringing down sweeping indictments against chemical firms in China. And by the time we hit the May 2025 DEA National Drug Threat Assessment, we are looking at a fully matured, deeply entrenched global network. Okay, so to understand how this whole machine works, we really have to start at the very beginning of the supply chain. Let's look at the Chinese precursor pipeline. Now, the sheer scale of this chemical flow is rooted in a pretty fascinating geopolitical reality. If we draw from a really comprehensive March 2022 report by Vanda Feldad-Brown over at the Brookings Institution, we can impartially lay out exactly what's happening here. The raw ingredients required to cook synthetic drugs, which are known as precursors, well, they primarily originate overseas. They're largely coming from these massive chemical manufacturing sectors in China, and we are talking about dual-use chemicals here. These are things that have perfectly legitimate industrial purposes, but they're being diverted right into the black market on a completely industrial scale. Right, so how do these chemicals actually physically move? Well, step one is production. And we know this definitively thanks to a June 2023 Department of Justice indictment in the Southern District of New York against a company called Hubei Amarvel Biotech. The DOJ documented exactly how this chemical company openly advertised precursor chemicals, going so far as to use deceptive packaging just to bypass customs. Then, step two is trans-Pacific maritime shipping. All these disguised chemicals get loaded up onto these massive, floating city-sized container ships. Finally, step three is the arrival at contested Mexican ports, and this is the critical moment where that maritime logistics network connects with the cartel's ground operations. And all of this builds into just an astonishing business reality. According to some truly brilliant reporting by Inside Crime, which is totally backed up by years of Treasury Department OFAC designations, there's a massive irony at the heart of this trade. You've got the Sinaloa Cartel and the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or CJNG. Now, these are the two most powerful, bitterly rivaled syndicates in all of Mexico. Yet, if you look at the supply chain data, it shows they frequently rely on the exact same Chinese chemical suppliers. It's wild. They are absolutely fierce competitors out in the streets, but on the logistics side, they're tapping into the exact same trans-Pacific pipeline. But, as you can imagine, sharing suppliers definitely doesn't mean sharing territory. All of those chemicals have to physically land somewhere. So let's look at the fight to control the bottleneck, the port of Manzanillo. The fight for this specific logistical choke point is incredibly grim. Just to give you an idea, in May 2023, the deputy director of customs operations in Manzanillo was actually murdered, a tragic story that was widely covered by outlets like La Jornada and Mazatlan Weekly. Because Manzanillo is one of Mexico's absolute busiest ports, it acts as ground zero for receiving those massive trans-Pacific precursor shipments. Controlling the port isn't just about moving the drugs themselves, it is about controlling the physical infrastructure required to manufacture them in the first place. The violence we see here is a direct result of cartels trying to violently enforce their own corrupted logistics systems right on top of the state's customs operations. So, to respond to this massive systemic breach, the Mexican government authorized a multi-year overhaul. Basically, in December 2020, a government decree transferred security control of the ports straight to SEMAR, the Mexican Navy. Then, by June 2021, the Merchant Marine was formally incorporated into the Navy itself. And finally, by May 2022, the government had granted the military full, overarching control of literally all customs operations nationwide. They essentially militarized their logistics hubs to try and finally break the cartel's grip on the supply chain. However, as we know with literally any complex system, when you reinforce the front door, intruders are just going to look for this side window. Let's explore the astonishing lengths to which smuggling and corruption evolved with narco subs and smuggling. 14. That is the number of active Mexican Navy members arrested in a massive September 2025 crackdown on a fuel theft and smuggling ring in Tamaulipas. This was reported by both the Latin Times and Mexico News Daily, and it brilliantly illustrates a huge problem. Even when you hand logistics over to the military, the sheer financial gravity of these cartels can corrupt the very institutions deployed to secure the ports. The cartels need fuel to move their product, right? So they just went ahead and bought the people guarding it. And the scale of this corruption? It's truly global. Just a few months later, in April 2026, a fugitive Mexican Navy officer, who was a key player wanted in connection to that exact same military fuel smuggling ring, was finally tracked down and arrested. But here's the kicker. He wasn't arrested in Mexico. He was arrested thousands of miles away in Argentina. The logistics of the cartels aren't just about moving chemicals anymore. They're about moving money, resources, and human assets across entire continents just to protect their investments. And when those ports get too hot, you simply bypass them. Driven by these logistical challenges, cartels are funding some incredible technological innovations. A perfect example is this rare, fully electric narco submarine that was seized in Colombia, as reported by US&I News. By removing the super loud diesel engines, they created a stealth vessel that's perfectly designed to evade sonar and thermal imaging as it moves product up the Pacific coast. It's like they have an illicit, multi-million-dollar R&D department entirely focused on solving transportation bottlenecks. Unbelievable, right? With the cartels constantly innovating their supply chains like that, international authorities have had to drastically change up their approach, which brings us to our next point, the global sanctions web. You see, law enforcement isn't just out there chasing speedboats anymore. They're actively attacking the corporate infrastructure of the cartels themselves. This response spans across the entirety of the U.S. government. For instance, in April 2024, the U.S. House Select Committee launched investigations into the geopolitical origins of the chemical crisis. Then, between 2021 and 2025, the Treasury Department used OFAC to systematically freeze the financial networks of CJNG and Sinaloa operatives, getting right down to the specific individuals running the logistics in Manzanillo. And all of this is layered right on top of these relentless, data-driven interdiction efforts by the DEA. They are quite literally fighting a logistics war using economic weapons. Now, to really wrap our heads around the physical volume this international dragnet is up against, just consider a single DEA operation from June 2023 covered by CBS News. In that one operation, they seized 200 kilos of fentanyl precursor chemicals. And remember, we are not talking about the finished drug here. We are talking about 200 kilograms of the raw, highly concentrated starting materials. The staggering physical scale of these shipments proves that despite all the sanctions and all the naval blockades, this global illicit logistics machine just continues to operate on a massive factory-level scale. Which leaves us with this final, absolutely vital question to ponder. If exposing and attacking a global cartel supply chain only forces them to innovate faster, driving them towards stealth submarines, complex front companies, and corrupted military officials, what does the next evolution of illicit logistics actually look like? Are we looking at drone swarms, fully automated dark web shipping networks, or maybe something we haven't even conceived of yet? The reality is, the logistics puzzle never truly gets solved. It just constantly evolves. I really hope this explainer has given you a much clearer, more structured understanding of how this hidden world operates. Keep asking those big questions, keep looking closely at the data, and thank you so much for learning with me today. See you next time.